Thank you for tuning in to the Why Marketing Podcast. My guest today is Doug Zarkin, the CMO of Pearle Vision. So Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited that you're able to be on the show because in my opinion, you've had a really interesting background of marketing experiences over your career. And so maybe that's a great place for us to kick off the show today. So if you don't mind, if you could share with everyone a bit about your career journey and how you ended up at Luxottica as the CMO for Pearle Vision.
Sure. I'd like to tell you that it was a series of strategically planned moves, but sometimes you take a step backwards to take two steps forward. I will say that when I graduated graduate school, I knew that I eventually wanted to run a business or run a brand or lead a brand. And like most kids coming out of grad school, they really don't have an understanding of exactly how to achieve the end state. And so this was, back in the mid 90s, and got some really good family friend advice. This is pre-LinkedIn, pre-Facebook. And somebody said to me, look, if you want to eventually be in the driver's seat, be driving the train, get on at the back, work your way to the front, do every single role and function so that when you're in a position of leadership to be conducting or driving the train, you'll not only understand the roles and functions, you'll understand how to speak the language in those roles and functions. And more importantly, you'll be able to motivate those people that are in those roles and functions that are essential for them to do what they need to do in order for you to effectively lead. And it was amazing advice. And so I started out in the agency world in media, went to account management, was part of a great training program at Saatchi & Saatchi, and then eventually spent about 7 years at the Gray Global Group family, where I eventually started and led the youth and entertainment division of Gray. From there, I moved on to the client side where I've led marketing for a division of Avon, for Victoria's Secret Pink, and now most recently as the CMO for Pearle Vision here at Luxottica.
That advice that you got, that was really great advice. I mean, I was trying to write it down as you were talking. They said get on the train, but get in on the back of it and work your way up to the front of it.
Absolutely. It's amazing. Starting out in the agency world, you're really tasked with what, not why. You're given a budget by your client. You're directed to develop an advertising campaign. They give you the strategy. You come back with the execution. At least that's the way it was, back in the early 90s. Although the model hasn't changed that much. But learning sort of how to put a brand on the brain of a consumer as an agency guy really made it a lot easier when I transitioned into determining the why, not just approving the what, of how a brand was going to move. What was the effective strategy that we were going to use? What were the positioning elements? What was the holistic 360-degree integrated marketing approach? What was the end state, both emotionally and rationally? These are all skills that I learned on the agency side that I hopefully have put to good use on the client side.
So it turns out to be a pretty strategic move to have started out on the agency side by you.
Absolutely. I mean, if I told you that I absolutely wanted to go from leading media for Bacardi in the United States Tennis Association to being the account lead on General Mills pre-sweets breakfast cereals, that was not a path that I knew that I was going to take. Saatchi had an amazing training program with the General Mills client. And so having the opportunity to work on these mega franchises, Trix, Lucky Charms, Cocoa Puffs, it sounds funny, but those businesses are massive contributors to GMI's P&L, at least it was at that point. And it started to really lay the foundation for what I call my second MBA, which is really understanding what they don't teach you in graduate school. The true strategy, what really marketing is, how to develop effective positioning. All of those things really came from being on the agency side, and hopefully over the last decade on the client side, I've been able to refine and strengthen those muscles to really become skilled at really connecting people to brands, people to services, people to business.
So then how do you think your background going from the agency then to like a retail consumer side has really helped you become a better marketer and CMO there at Pearle Vision?
Yeah, so, I think marketers in general can never forget that we are in the business of essentially motivating people to take action. And whether you're in the entertainment industry and that's tune in, whether you're a consumable and it's, going to buy a hamburger or a bottle of soda, or in my case at Pearle, motivating them to get their eyes examined and eventually follow up with a great complete pair of glasses. Understanding the consumer centricity point is something that I began to learn more on the agency side that has allowed me, I think, to excel on the client side. And the reason is because we as marketers can never forget that we're talking about consumers' emotional decisions before their rational choices. So a consumer makes an emotional decision to trust you with their money, with their brand choice, and then makes the rational choice to, in our case, schedule an exam on a Thursday, or go buy a hamburger, or choose your soda from the aisle. But understanding the emotional decision-making process, the education really began on the agency side. And it was amazing when I think back 20 plus years to those very fundamental truths that exist about people and how people make those emotional decisions. What are the core things that a consumer looks for? How to even speak to a consumer. Those were all skills that, a decade on the agency side really helped me learn.
I've actually heard that from several other CMOs too. And I think it's interesting because they had similar backgrounds as yours, where they start out on the agency side and then transitioned eventually over to the client side. And I know from our past discussions, Doug, you talk a lot about the art and sciences of brand building. And I hope we get a chance about that in more depth today, because I think it's very interesting and relevant, especially in today's environment. But I'm kind of curious to know now, though, is if your basis for formulating your viewpoint and perspective on the art and sciences of brand building started kind of coming together when you were on the agency side. Do you think that's probably when that all happened?
Absolutely. I think I remember sitting in some of my earliest agency side meetings and listening to our senior account leads, our senior creatives interact with our senior clients. And the discussion and the debate before the eventual commitment was both objective and subjective. Objective, obviously, is when you have data. Subjective is when you're talking about colors and models and the way something is positioned or said, recognizing that there wasn't a single pathway to victory, but there was really choosing a pathway to victory and being consistently consistent in how you bring that to life over time is really what allowed some of the businesses that I was working on early in my career to thrive. And certainly it's been a principle that I've applied as I've taken on more senior leadership roles on the client side.
And it's clearly helped you get to where you are today, which is the CMO at Pearle Vision, which is also part of Luxottica. So can you share a little bit more about that organization and your role there?
Sure. Pearle is an interesting, or as I like to call it, a terrifyingly exciting business. Arguably the most intellectually challenging brand and business I've worked on in my 20 plus years in marketing. And the reason is because it's the intersection of several disciplines. First, you have the franchisee side. So we are a brand that Luxottica owns, but about 80% of our locations are owned and operated by doctors and opticians. And so inherently, you have an internal customer base that you need to sell through. You need to create an engagement with and a believability from. Then you have the healthcare services side, which, in the last decade, I can't think of an industry that has gone through more rapid change or more fluid change than healthcare. It seems from the outside as just a person in the United States, it's a broken discipline. On a business side, it's extremely challenging. Does your business accept certain insurance plans? How do you medical bill? All of those intricacies. So you're dealing with all of the challenges of a healthcare services side and insurance side. Then you have the retail side, which in our case, we are part of an organization that sells preeminent frames and lenses in the world. We own brands like Ray-Ban and Oakley and now have access to the best of the best from the lens world. And so when we're selling you the perfect pair, truly it is the perfect pair. And so how do you blend retail with healthcare, franchise with brand, digital and brick and mortar? All of these things come together and it's wrapped up in the name Pearle Vision. And, when Dr. Stanley Pearle started this business in 1961, I don't fully think he understood the amazing box of goodies that he was opening up that now I have the privilege of being part of the leadership team for.
So many goodies there to unpack between your franchisees, healthcare issues, and retail brands that y'all carry. So as the CMO at Pearle Vision, where have you spent a majority of your time to impact the brand?
So I think I go back to something that I learned early on in my agency career. You are as best as your worst performing location. You are as best as your worst customer experience. And I think consistency is probably the biggest opportunity in any business, but especially in a franchise business, where you only have a certain degree of control, a significant amount of influence, but you really have to bring people along the journey with you. Leading a business, any business, if you don't have people that are willing to go with you on that leadership journey, you're just a dude or a dudette sitting on top of the mountain waving their hand. Creating the will oftentimes creates the skill. And I think it's taken us a few years to really reinvigorate Pearle, because we had to focus the business on what its core competency truly is, which in our case, it's delivering an amazing patient experience through a focus on genuine eye care. Caring about the people behind the eyes, from the exam room to the retail floor, earning their trust through a series of small moments. Those are all things that are at the basis of what we stand for and what our reason for being is. And the reason, quite frankly, that we have really in the last 5 years moved from a heavy promotional message into much more of a quality of care. Our doctors are the best of the best. We're selling the best of the best product. There's no reason or no need to have to give something away to sell something. And so as long as we deliver a very strong value equation, value being experience divided by price, the better experience, the stronger experience, the more willing and more appropriate charging a premium price is. It's when that relationship becomes inverse that you have to go heavy discounting, like some of our competitors do.
So I just want to make sure I understood it, what you were saying. By creating a better overall customer experience at your stores, you're not having to offer deeper discounts like your competitors are doing because they see there's more value in your brand.
Well, by delivering an amazing experience, glasses starts as a medical device, and ends with an amazing accessory that you wear on your face that could help you change your look. But it starts with really an inherent medical need. And so when you have the kind of quality of care that we deliver, when you have built a reputation for caring for people the way we have since 1961, there is no reason why you should have to give away 2 pairs for $99. You're doing yourself, your associates, the doctors, the opticians a disservice by underselling and undervaluing the amazing talent that goes into truly making that perfect pair.
Plus, it's a slippery slope. And once you do it, it's almost impossible to walk that discounting back in.
Yeah, it's interesting. Discounting doesn't garner loyalty. It garners favor. Loyalty is based through trust. It's based through small things that leave somebody feeling like they had an amazing experience. I mean, think about the last time you went to a great restaurant and had a phenomenal waiter. We all remember what a phenomenal waiter is. It's because of what they did over the entire dining experience. It's all those small things that they did to make you feel special. So that when the bill came, absolutely, I'm going to tip them 20%. No hesitation. You're not looking at the fact that you paid $49 for a hamburger, or maybe you are, but you feel a hell of a lot better about doing so because you were romanced. You were treated like a person. You were cared for during the hour and a half or 2 hours you were sitting at the table. So all of those things really go into justifying a premium experience and an elevated price point.
I think that's a good perspective because even though I would personally hate spending $49 on a hamburger, but if the overall dining experience was exceptional, it would definitely make it easier to say, swallow. Let's now go back to the subject of brand building and how you're deploying both the art and sciences of brand building to Pearle Vision.
I think it starts out with the premise of in this day and age, how do you use data? What is your perspective on data, big and small? And I'm a firm believer that data doesn't make decisions. People make decisions using data. And the reason why the latter is so important is because the data that you get is only as good as the questions that you ask. And understanding how to ask a question, understanding what the questions even are, does not necessarily come from data. It comes from experience. A consumer may indeed tell you what they want, but do they really tell you what they need? And I would say if you talk to any of the most valuable assets in your brand, which are your frontline associates, your frontline associates will tell you what is needed based on the experience and the interaction with people, not because 2x2 crosstab told them to tell you. And so I think the art comes in figuring out how to use data for good and not for evil, how to use those breadcrumbs to help formulate a philosophy or an approach. The science comes in terms of being able to measure and determine a strong ROI, which is an imperative. Marketing has to drive top and bottom line. Its ability to do so needs to be measured. Some things are easier measured than others, but that's where the science comes in. The science comes in being able to optimize against the things that you're doing. The art comes into figuring out what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Science may tell you to run a television commercial, but it's not going to tell you how to talk to a consumer within that 30-second spot.
How to tell a story.
How to tell a story, or the fact that a story is even important. And if we've learned anything from Amazon, if we've learned anything from the age of personalization and choices, is that if the consumer doesn't like what you're saying, there's definitely an alternative very easily available to them. So you better be darn good at listening in order to effectively lead them to your brand, product, or service.
I think it's exactly right. And, on listening, you talked about being able to listen to and taking note of what your frontline associates are hearing from the customer. How do you go about capturing that information and speaking? Because it's a very large organization, so you've got to be able to pull that information and give them a platform to be able to deliver.
Welcome to one of the benefits of being part of a franchise organization. Franchisees will tell you exactly what they think at any time. They'll tell you when you are not doing a good job or perceptually not doing a good job. And they'll also tell you when they believe you're doing a very good job. That's one of the benefits of having franchisees, is that you have an instant feedback layer. We have built out platforms to allow us to listen. We have an incredibly strong reputation management platform. And I'm talking more than just looking at what people are saying on Twitter and Facebook, although that's turned into great outlets for people to vent and celebrate their good stories and vent their bad stories. But we have a reputation platform that allows us to hear how our patients think their experience with the doctors at Pearle Vision went. And it's a lot easier to have a rational conversation than an emotional conversation. A rational conversation starts with, listen, I'm just pulling up the reviews. I know you think you're doing a great job, Dr. Fred, but here's what the last 25 patients that have been into your eye care center are saying about you. And it's black and white. And so you can begin to start asking people to be emotionally honest with themselves, as well as intellectually honest with themselves, in order to then break down the walls and say, listen, what do I need to do to affect change? So, there are more than enough paths to allow you to get feedback on your business.
And then once you have that feedback, what's the best way to deploy that from a marketer standpoint?
So I think you want to look for trend. Everyone has a bad day. Everybody has a really good day. You almost want to kind of swap out the top quartile and the bottom quartile and look at what's going on in the middle. And, you have to gauge how below what your expectations are the middle is, and work to make those adjustments. Those adjustments are not massive overhauls. At least they shouldn't be. If it's a brand journey that you're taking, which is I think what marketers are doing, is they're moving their business systematically and calculated forward, then you need to figure out the adjustments that you need to make along the way, the refinement. The hardest thing that I see happening to businesses is host scale revolutions. Today they're selling chicken, tomorrow they're selling pizza. And it's like, why? Well, because the customers told me they didn't like my chicken, so now we got to sell pizza. Well, maybe instead of selling pizza, work on improving your chicken. What is it about the chicken that you don't like? I mean, maybe it's a terrible analogy, but marketing is about positioning, and positioning is about the art of sacrifice. And so at some point you have to effectively choose what you are not going to do, so that you can do a much better job at the things that you absolutely must do. There's must do's, need to do's, nice to do's, and yeah, okay, that could be fun. You got to do the must do's, followed by the need to do's, then the nice to do's, and then that could be cool. When you don't focus on the must do's, everything else becomes less and less important.
So I guess for most CMOs, it's got to be difficult to decide on what is best to sacrifice for their brand in order to focus on what is the most relevant.
There has to be a vision before there can be an execution. Understanding the why makes the what that much easier.
What I really like is that you have all these witty quotes. And earlier you said something that I really liked, and I wrote it down. It was something along the line of, the will creates the skill. Awesome quote, by the way. Where did that saying come from?
It actually came from an old coach of mine back in high school. You've got to want to get better before you can actually get better. I have a 9-year-old little boy who I coach in lacrosse and in flag football, and he's unbelievably passionate about sports, but he's not a big fan of practice. And, I keep saying, I'm like, practice. Yeah, no, absolutely. An Allen Iverson thing for sure. But I keep explaining to him, like, Ben, you've got to practice how you play. You've got to create that muscle memory so that when it comes time to counting, you actually just, know what to do. Is that easy to teach a 9-year-old? No. And so you do it in stages. The desire to want to get better is absolutely inherent in him, which is why he puts so much pressure on himself, which is why he tries so hard. And I think in business, a lot of times when you make changes, there's a great line in the movie Boiler Room, motion creates emotion. Anytime you're moving something on a business, people are going to get emotional about it, especially long-term associates. But if you can help them understand why this is a must-do, it makes it a little bit easier to get them to actually do it. And if you're listening along the way, you may have to change or modify the must-do to be even more effective. That's my parenting advice. Oh, wait, this is a business podcast. I apologize. Let's go back.
I love it because I'm a motivational quote nerd. So I always love hearing new ones, especially since like you, I coach my kids in lacrosse and in football, and I'm always throwing out these motivational quotes for them before games and practices. So I appreciate you sharing yours with me. But switching gears now, I'm curious if you always knew that you wanted to be in marketing, or was there something else that you wanted to do growing up?
What did I want to be when I was younger? Depends on what day. I went to undergrad and sort of caught the acting bug. And I remember my junior year, parents came up for visiting day at school, at college. And I said to my dad, I'm thinking maybe I want to be an actor. And he's like, oh, you want to get your MBA? Sure, no problem. And, I'm like, no, I want to be an actor. And he's like, Doug, he's like, you want to take a couple acting classes? Great. He's like, that thrill of getting on stage, that thrill of creating a story and bringing it to life. He's like, at some point in your life, if you want to try it, fine. He's like, but business can give you that same thrill. And he was right. I graduated undergrad on a Sunday and went to graduate school on a Monday. And so, okay, I was going to go into the business world. Then I thought I wanted to be an FBI agent. But I remember I got a hold of the application form and it was like a dictionary. And I'm like, I'm not filling this out. Thought about being a lawyer. And so I was actually getting my MBA and taking law classes at the same time, and realized that I didn't want to be a lawyer. And then thought I was going to go to Wall Street and be the next Gordon Gekko, and started to interview on Wall Street out of graduate school, and realized that, I wanted to make a difference as Doug, not just, whatever my title was going to be on my business card. And found this wonderful career in marketing and in running a business and a brand, which has allowed me the thrill of standing on stage or, appearing on TV and talking about the businesses and trends, but also applying that curiosity that I've always had about figuring it out and bringing that to bear to build business solutions. So, it's the right career for me, and, who knows where it's going to take me in the future, but hopefully someplace great.
Well, there's no doubt your passion for marketing is infectious. When you talk about it, you can hear it in your voice, which is also why you're so good at it, and you genuinely care.
Well, you have to figure out, I think, and maybe it's because I've gotten older, but you figure out sort of the 80% rule, which is, 80% of the things that you do need to be at the 80% level of perfection in order to do them. There's 20% of the things that you do that must be perfect before you do them. And it's basically the law of diminishing returns. As a marketer, because there is always an art and science, perfect is relative, perfect is subjective. Ask yourself, does that extra 20% really matter? Is it going to make a material difference? I've tried to apply that to how I give creative feedback. I've tried to apply that to how I push strategy. I try to apply that to how I lead my team. The 20% of the things that have to be perfect, that is probably the hardest thing to identify. But when you've identified them, you absolutely have to dig deep and have to make it perfect, which is actually liberating for the other 80%, because then you get to focus more on enjoying the journey versus just arriving at the destination.
Oh, yeah. You see so many people trying to make 100% perfect, it's impossible.
I did that for the very early part of my career, especially on the client side. I felt such a tremendous pressure now that I was responsible for, 60, 70% of the P&L, that everything had to be perfect. I've had to learn that it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'll get back to you. It's okay to realize that it's all of the points that you need to make a decision aren't necessarily crystal clear. Being comfortable with ambiguity comes with time and experience. It also comes with having a refined gut instinct. And I think, part of what I tried to do at Pearle, I was able to do it at Avon and even at Victoria's Secret, is really look at things from the customer perspective. And when in doubt, defer to the customer perspective. Not what I think, but what I think the customer would think. It served pretty well.
Oh, I would definitely say so. And now we're unfortunately at the home stretch for the show, Doug, which takes us to one of my favorite parts, which is reflection. Now, you started off the show by telling us that you got some great advice from someone else when you were just starting out your career. So now you have the chance to go back yourself to around that same moment in time and drop some pearls of wisdom that would help you navigate your career forward. What would that be?
I think the lesson of art and science didn't come until probably 10 years into my career journey. You come out of graduate school. Graduate school teaches you how to think. Undergrad teaches you how to memorize. And, I did my MBA in 13 months. And so it was sort of like a fire hose. And then I got into the world of advertising and, was trying to figure out how to solve problems. I don't think I had a full appreciation of the balancing act between art and science. And it's definitely not an even Steven, especially depending on what business or how your business is doing. You may lean much heavier into science than art or vice versa. But if I had to give myself some wise advice, it's, Doug, realize that number one, marketing and building businesses and brands is an art and science. And because of that, enjoy it. Enjoy the opportunity to discover the answers. Recognize that doing something wrong once is a learning experience. Don't be afraid of the learning experiences. Doing something wrong, the same thing wrong twice is a mistake. And when you do it 3 times, that's when your boss has a conversation with you. Don't be afraid of those learning experiences. Embrace them. And the only way you're going to embrace them is by actually putting yourself out there. I think the third thing is recognizing that when you eventually get to the front of the train, realize that the first thing you need to do at the front of the train is get to know all of the people that are behind you, because those are the ones that are going to put you at the top of the mountain. Take the time to understand what they want, understand what they need, and appreciate the fact that as their leader, your job is to motivate them. That's how you're going to generate tremendous success. And whatever success I've been able to achieve in my career has been based on the fact that I've surrounded myself, hired great people. I've surrounded myself with people who intellectually and emotionally challenge me and have hopefully taught them something along the way to make me a better leader, to allow me to make better decisions.
That is awesome advice. And I love that advice. And it's clearly serving you well based on all the success that you've had throughout your career and why you're such an awesome leader in CMO. So before we wrap up the show today, Doug, is there anything else that you wanted to mention or discuss?
For right now, the message I'd leave to everybody is take a look at what we're doing. Are we connecting with you emotionally? Have we earned your trust? Have we been able to help you make that emotional decision in order to make that rational choice to schedule an exam with us and trust your eyes to Pearle? And if we've done that, great. And if we've got work to do, know that we recognize that it's progress, not perfection, and we're still on the journey.
There's no doubt that if you're on that journey with Pearle Vision, there's nothing but incredible upside for that brand. Because I believe it when I hear you say it, your passion, your expertise, you're genuine, you care, you're authentic. And that's so important in today's environment.
I appreciate it.
I really appreciate you being on the show today. And I hope that we can have you back on for a follow-up episode very soon. But before I let you go, I do have one last question. And I promise this will be the last one. If our listeners want to learn or find a Pearle Vision center near them, how can they do that?
PearleVision.com. You can connect with your neighborhood eye care center and schedule an exam.
That's awesome. Well, Doug, thanks so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.